There are three things that darkness cannot contain: the moon, the stars, and the truth. All three will find their way through the darkness. Truth will often pierce its way through in unexpected ways, at unexpected times, and sometimes through unexpected people. Hello, my name is Lenora Howze, and you're listening to Secrets of the cHURTched, Revealed to Heal. That first meeting with my birth mother over 30 years ago was the beginning of yet another journey to discovery and my truth. Not only did I finally get the chance to learn the truth about who my birth mother was and to hear all about her life and her family, her relationship with my birth father, and, well, how I even got here, I also began to learn and understand things about myself, about my personality. It was absolutely amazing to see how much of who I was and who I still am was a result of my DNA, even down to little things like the way I blink my eyes when I'm in a deep discussion or in deep thought. And if you are listening and you know me or have ever been in a conversation with me, you know what I'm talking about. Or my love for a certain style of clothing and fashion, little things like that. Who would have imagined that something like that would be in my blood, in my DNA? Let me give you an example. So as you know by now, especially if you took good notes when I was explaining all of my families and trying to give you a visual of my family tree, which at this point is more like a family forest, I was raised practically from birth with my adopted family, the Howzes, and they were the only family I knew. My mother, Betty, was jazzy in her own right. She always looked sharp, always had on a heel. I mean, I hardly ever saw her in a flat shoe, and my God, never in a sneaker. And she never went out the house without some sort of color on her lip. I don't care whether she was going to the grocery store or to the hair salon. She went out looking stylish. But to my recollection, she never wore hats. And I'm talking church hats, not like hats in the winter, but those big fancy church hats that can be found on any given Sunday, particularly in the black church. You know, some of those hats were so big they needed their own pew. Well, as soon as I got old enough and I could afford to do so, I went out and bought myself a collection of Sunday church hats. And unless it was a Sunday that my choir had to sing, I wore a hat to church every Sunday. I loved hats. I still do. But I never knew why. And as I said, my mother, Betty Howze, she didn't wear them, nor did any of my sisters. Well, guess who did love hats and wore them every Sunday? You guessed it, of course, Marion, my birth mother. She loved hats, and yes, she wore one to church every Sunday. I didn't know that. I didn't grow up with her to see that. But it was something that I clearly got from her. And while something like that might seem trivial to you, but for someone like me, and perhaps for many children who didn't grow up with their biological parents, to discover that you share any trait with someone whose DNA you also share, well, it's a big deal. Now, that's certainly not where the similarities ended. First, as I've mentioned before, Marion and I looked exactly alike. I mean, shockingly. I remember over the years after I met her and once she felt comfortable bringing me into her world, into her life, we would run into people who knew her but never knew that she had a daughter. I mean, why? How would they? And they would do double takes. And some people would even ask, because, you know, we're talking about a very small town where everyone knew everyone else. They would ask her, so who is this? Is this your twin? All the while staring at me like to say, we know who you are. And then some of them would even ask me or say to me, well, we don't think we've ever met you. So to say that those moments were awkward and uncomfortable would be an understatement. And sometimes those questions about who I was were difficult for Marion to answer. and sometimes she didn't. But even if she had wanted to, we looked so much alike that she couldn't deny that I was her child. And to be honest, I've often wondered if God did that on purpose, just in case she was tempted to deny me. And not that she would have. I'm not saying that, but she couldn't have, even if she wanted to. That's how much we looked alike. And then there were our non-physical similarities. So you've heard me say that even as a child, I was a leader. I had a take-charge personality. Okay, some may have called it bossy or said things like, you always have something to say, because as far back as I can remember, I have always had something to say. I've always had my own strong opinions, and I had a perspective on nearly everything, and I didn't mind sharing any of it. And the memories of what we will call spankings, air quotes, were hardly ever for anything I did, but almost always for something I said. I mean, let's face it, I grew up in the 60s and 70s in the era of children being seen but not heard. Well, that concept was unfortunately lost on me because I always wanted to be heard. I guess it's a little ironic that I'm now doing a podcast, huh? So anyway, when I finally met and got to know my birth mother, I wanted to call my parents and say, see, it wasn't my fault. It was in my blood. I couldn't help it. Turns out that my outspokenness, my straightforwardness, my assertiveness, my bossiness, I know I hear somebody saying, you bossy, all of that came from my birth mother. A woman who I had never met or spent one day of my life with until that day in January of 1989. But someone who I was so much like and in so many ways. The power of DNA. It's amazing. And there were other things. For instance, I found out where I got my singing chops. Marion, too, was a singer, and in fact, our voices even had the same tone and quality and vibrato. It was truly incredible for me after 30 years to find out who I had come from, at least half of who I'd come from, because I would later discover that I shared as many characteristics with my biological father as I did with my birth mother. But much more to come about my father in future episodes. In those first months, as Marion and I were getting to know each other, it was almost like we were courting each other, like two people do when they first start dating, just wanting to get to know everything you can about the person. And we had a lot to catch up on. But if we were courting, we were doing so in secret. Other than the few people in my life, like my sisters and my close friends in Philly who helped me to find Marion, my sister-in-laws, no one else knew that I had found her. And absolutely no one in Marion's life, not her brothers, her sisters, her children, and certainly not her husband, had any idea that on January 16th, the daughter that they didn't even know she had walked into her job and into her life. So in essence, even after meeting Marion, I was still a secret. And I'm going to be honest with you, I was okay with that because after all, finding my birth mother was for me. It was for my personal satisfaction to find out who I came from and more importantly, to learn my family's health history so I could arm myself and know what to do to prevent me from getting these illnesses that I may have been genetically predisposed to. It was never my intention to find a family. I had one. I had a wonderful family. It was certainly not my intention to disrupt her life, especially after I learned of the circumstances surrounding my birth and that my birth was the result of a church scandal. My Lord, who knew? So I told Marion that her secret was safe with me until the time came when or if she was ready to divulge it. And for nearly a year, she kept our relationship to herself. For the first few months, we talked on the phone almost every day, but only when she was at work. And for a long time, I didn't even have her home phone number. And why would I have? I certainly wasn't going to call her there. She told me all about my 3 younger brothers and how, ironically, I was her only daughter. And ironically for me, I didn't have any younger brothers, so I thought that was just really cool. That was an added bonus. She told me about the large family she came from. Either 2 or 3 brothers and 4 sisters, a lot of them, a whole lot of aunts and uncles and a gazillion cousins. She came from a large family. She told me about her late mother, my grandmother, who, according to Marion, was the one who suggested she go away to hide her pregnancy with me. Now, I would later and just recently learn that that was not exactly how things happened. So who knows? Maybe I misheard her or I misunderstood her, but suffice it to say, I spent most of the last 30 years believing that it was my grandmother who was determined to keep my existence a secret to protect the family name and to protect the identity and reputation of my father, the family pastor. So what really happened? Well, we are several episodes away from that revelation, but stick with me. We'll get there. So for months, Marion and I carried on this hush-hush relationship. And then, nearly 6 months after I showed up in her office doorway, Marion came to Philadelphia to visit me for my 30th birthday. It was the first time she was meeting my friends and specifically meeting the friend who I've been referring to as Carolyn, who along with her mother were instrumental in helping me to find and to meet Marion on that day. Now at that point, Marion had still not told her family about me. So how she was able to get away and travel out of town without question, I really don't know, or I don't remember. But she did come. She came by bus from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia, and she stayed with me in my apartment, which I gotta be honest with you was a little strange. Because for the first time since I was born, my birth mother celebrated the day I came into the world with me. And while it was a memorable day and a lot of fun and laughter and good food with my friends, and they, like everyone else, marveled at the stunning resemblance I had to Marion, there was a moment that day, right in the midst of my birthday celebration, that was and still is a little sad to me. It was the last birthday that my mother, Betty Howze, was alive. And even though she was very ill and she was weak, she somehow mustered up the strength to call me on my birthday. And she called right in the midst of all the festivities with my other mother in the next room. I remember feeling so guilt-ridden, like I had betrayed my mother at a time when she was at her lowest point physically. The ovarian cancer that she had been diagnosed with 3 years before had come back, and now here she was, literally near death. And here I was, partying it up with the one person she never wanted me to even know about, let alone meet. So I closed my bedroom door to drown out the noise of the festivities so that I could have a conversation with my mother. And I never let on that my other mother, my birth mother, was in the next room. Because I was determined, I made a promise to myself that Betty Howze, the only mother I'd ever known, would go to her grave believing that she was the only mother I ever knew. And 3 months later, in August of that same year, she did just that. So I dedicate this episode to my mommy, Betty Elizabeth Howze. And until we meet again, may you continue to rest in peace. Wow, okay, so I'm going to stop there for now. But before I end this episode, I want to speak to anyone who might be listening who's either adopted or perhaps you have adopted children of your own. I spoke a little earlier in this episode about how I felt guilty when my birth mother was at my house for my birthday and my mother called. And just for the record, whenever I say my mother or my father, whether it's on this podcast or even when I'm having a conversation with people, I'm referring to Betty and John Howze. And not out of any disrespect or disregard for my birth parents, because after all, they brought me into this world. And I really do love them both. So while I am Marion and Herb's child, I was and will always be John and Betty Howze's daughter. And trust me, there's a difference. But to all my fellow adoptees and foster children, if you know your biological parents, it's okay to love and honor both of them, both your mothers, both your fathers, if you know them all. You don't need to feel guilty or feel like you're betraying one of them or any of them when you spend time with one or when you want to spend time with the other. Nor do you owe anyone an explanation about how you feel. The bottom line is whether you were born like me, whether you were newborn rather like me, or you were an older child and you were separated for whatever reason from your biological parent or parents, or even if your parents were divorced and maybe they were never married and now you have a bonus parent or a step parent, as some might call them. Well, my word to you is this: you aren't the reason or the cause, or certainly not the blame, for whatever your parental situation is. There were decisions made by adults, by grown-ups, and perhaps good decisions like the ones that were made about me to give me up for adoption. But these decisions, you had no say in. I had no say in. So if or when you start to feel torn about your feelings for your biological parents versus your step parents or your adopted parents, just know this: you have the capacity to love them all in your way and in your time, and you should never have to choose between any of them. They're adults. They will learn to share you and to share your love, and you should never feel guilty like I often did about any of it. Remember, we are created in God's image, and because God is love, we have the capacity to love as big and as much as we want to, whether we share that person's DNA or not. So I hope that helps somebody. And if it does, shoot me an email at mychurchsecret@gmail.com. That's mychurchsecret@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you and perhaps one day have you share your story on this podcast. But until then, and as always, remember this: you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Have a blessed week.
You have been listening to Secrets of the Churched, Revealed to Heal, a production of Be Inspired Global Media. If you have been burdened with a church secret and want to be free and healed, please email us
at mychurchsecret@gmail.com.
You can also follow us on Twitter at ChurchSecrets1. Look for new episodes of Secrets of the Church every Friday. And remember, you shall know the truth, and the truth will make you free.